resources to partner with you and your children as we educate them throughout the school year. And so the focus this time around is technology. And I would like to introduce you to our guest presenter this afternoon. So we're thrilled to have Dr. Jeff Karst. He is going to share his insights and expertise, which are invaluable for our community. He's a pediatric psychologist at Children's Hospital, so he works with children, teens, and their parents by addressing a broad range of challenges that impact social and emotional health. His recent work emphasizes the impact of social media, screen time, although sometimes we want to screen time, and technology on mood and quality of life. During his presentation, Dr. Jeff will share his knowledge about the impact of technology use and practical tips for what can be done to support our young people. After the presentation, we're going to do a table talk. So if we need to just readjust so we have a full table, there are some questions in the middle of your table you're going to get to discuss, and I'll share more about that. And also on the table, as you're listening, if a question comes to mind, there's a spot to jot down those questions. He'll do a Q&A after our table talk time, and then we'll end our time together. We encourage everyone to participate actively, ask questions, and take advantage of this opportunity to learn from an expert in the field. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeff Karst.
All right, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm extremely excited for this presentation. As April mentioned, I'm a psychologist at Children's Wisconsin, and anybody working with children over the past decade plus knows just how pertinent, just how important this topic is, no matter what you're doing, if you're an educator, if you're a parent, if you're a psychologist. These things are new in many ways, and so there's just so many different things happening, and it's changing all the time. It makes it a really important topic. So I'll jump in and get started. I encourage you, if you have questions or thoughts pop up while I'm talking, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or just ask a question. I want this to be as interactive and as informative as possible. So in addition to a psychologist, I'm also a parent, and I'll be talking from both perspectives today because, as we'll get to, parenting is really challenging. And sometimes this is the parent I am, taking my 10, 8, and 5-year-old on a walk, being outside, doing something physically active and engaging and talking to them, and being the parent that I wish I always was. And then sometimes this is me as a parent, sitting there on the couch, exhausted from a long day of work, staring at my phone, probably reading about Gonzaga basketball again, as my kids always joke about. And there you can see my 2 younger kids engrossed in whatever I'm engrossed in. And this is the message I'm sending to them, right? So not a judgment, this is sometimes what we all do. And I think it's an important piece to start with, because we can talk about what's ideal, and we can talk about what should be done or what we recommend, but parenting is hard, and we know that there is a mix between what's ideal and what's practical. So I'll try to emphasize again that I'm speaking not just as a psychologist, but as a parent, knowing that these things really are open to a lot of questions, and we're still trying to figure out really what is best. So I always think about the movies Inside Out and Inside Out 2, which I love and highly recommend for those. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to. And they talk about one of the many wonderful kind of aspects of Riley's mind in the Inside Out movies are this idea of core beliefs. And so I wanted to start by kind of sharing 3 core beliefs I have that relate to this topic. And I already mentioned the first one. Parenting is really hard. There is not a manual. There is no guideline for how to raise your kids best or what the best approach is. And part of that is because every family has different needs, right? And as we think about this topic and think about the use of social media and phones and technology, this really relates to you as a parent, as a teen, as a family. This can be different depending on the context and depending on the situation, right? Is it great for a child to be sitting there staring at YouTube for 4 hours? immediate reaction to that question might be, no, that's not a healthy thing to do. Well, what if that kid's sitting in the hospital, and I work with a lot of kids that are hospitalized, and they're in pain, or they're nauseous, or they're not feeling well? Well, maybe that distraction, maybe doing that is what gets them through a really hard day. And so it's always important, I think, to remember that context, and to remember that I can talk about how things are for my family. You might be thinking through this presentation about how things work for your own family. But one thing I really try to understand as a psychologist, and I want to emphasize here today, is, again, every family is different. And lastly, to those who are kind of viewing this through the lens as a parent, you are the expert on your child, right? And as a psychologist, when I meet with families, one thing I really try to emphasize and focus on is you know your child best, you know your children best, if you have multiple children at home. And so what may work for one child may not work for another. So while all of these kind of things that we'll discuss kind of broadly might apply in different situations, it's also important to emphasize every parent, you know your child best and you know what might work for them and what might not. Okay, so moving from that, I want you to think about if there was a new soft drink or a new sports drink that came out. And we saw this maybe a couple of years ago with Prime, right? Suddenly all kids I were seeing, and it was related to social media, it turns out we're drinking this new energy drink called Prime. But imagine this new drink came out, and you noticed your kids at St. Marcus, kids in the community were all drinking this. What questions would you have? What would, and this is not a rhetorical question, what would you wonder about this drink? What might you want to know?
What's so special about the drink?
Yeah, great. Why is everybody drinking this? What's so special about it? What is the appeal? What else might you want to know as a parent or as a teacher? Yeah, what's in there, right? What is my kid consuming? What are they taking into their body? What else? What's that?
How much does it cost?
Yeah, excellent. How much does it cost? Where's my kid getting the money for this? What are we spending on this? Always at the forefront, right? Other thoughts? Yeah.
Is it healthy?
Is this healthy? Right? Does this have a lot of sugar? Does this have other ingredients that maybe aren't healthy for kids? Maybe it's really healthy. Maybe it's chock full of essential vitamins and minerals, right? So, is it healthy? We might want to know how much is okay, right? Health is kind of a relative thing. Is this something they can have 12 ounces of? Is this something they can have 40 ounces of? Should they have one a month? One a year? Like what amount is okay? Might want to know if it has caffeine in it, right? We know that one of the biggest problems for kids, and we'll talk about this more, but post-pandemic especially, sleep is a major challenge. So we might want to know if this new drink is around, if it has caffeine, if it's going to impact their sleep. Also might want to know if it's addictive, right? If we see everybody suddenly using something, and we see it everywhere, and its use seems to be increasing, we might want to know, is this physically or psychologically addictive in some way? And this is kind of at the genesis of when we talk about screens and social media. And I just finished this book recently, and for those who haven't had a chance to read it, I do recommend reading it. As a parent, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking and it can increase your anxiety. I will say the book operates at the extreme, maybe, of the harms of some of these things. But what this book, The Anxious Generation, really talks about is this idea relating back to that new drink, that social media, that technology, they're really new. And they kind of all came onto the scene before we even had time to ask these questions. Is it healthy? Is it addictive? How much is okay? And one of the challenges we have in mental health research is that by the time we finish answering those questions, things have already changed, right? We have studies that we're looking at like Facebook use. And now you talk to kids and they're not even using Facebook, so it doesn't really matter anymore. And so we're always a little bit behind the trends, and we're always trying to figure out the answers for whether things are safe, how much is okay, these types of questions that we might ask. We're always a little bit kind of, again, trailing behind what kids and teens are actually doing. But what we know is that they are using social media and technology on a daily basis, and often with minimal supervision, and we really don't know if it's safe. So 2 years ago, the Surgeon General came out with a warning, and it didn't say, if you read it closely, it didn't say social media is dangerous. It said we don't know if it's safe. Just basically said we have no idea how much is okay, if it's okay. And one of the things the anxious generation points out, and I thought this was an interesting point, we'll talk about this more in a minute, is even when social media first rolled out and Facebook kind of came on in about 2008, I believe was the year it really started to grow on college campuses. But it was on computers. And so even in that case, it might be that, okay, but we have this computer that's located in our living room and we can monitor that. But social media has evolved at the same time as smartphones have evolved. And so now it's again this idea of minimal supervision and constant availability. And really those things are all kind of connected together. And so what we'll talk about today, kind of as a broad outline for what I'm going to go over, is first defining what we mean by technology, because again, these things really are all interconnected. When we talk about phones or devices, social media, screen time, they all really are connected together. We'll talk a little bit about what we know, what data, what research has shown so far. Then I'm going to touch a bit on what you can do as an educator, as a parent, what you can do as a child or a teen. And we're going to end with the most important piece, is what we can do, because really this takes a community effort. And it's why I'm so glad to be here at a community like St. Marcus, because this really requires everybody joining together as parents, as a school community, as a church community, people coming together to figure out solutions to this, because it can't happen in a singular household alone. So kind of like I mentioned before, I'll talk about these terms kind of interchangeably because they really are, but it's important to think about how they impact one another, right? And one of the questions we get a lot about, when should my kid have a phone? Or is a smartwatch or a tablet better than a phone? What social media apps are okay? What ones are not okay? And it's really hard to answer those questions again because really these things are all related to one another. What is your child using it for? When are they using it? Is it on a phone or is it on the computer? And so all of these concepts are related, and as we kind of talk about this research, I think it's just kind of important to define that these things are really all interconnected. And this is not my graphic, I found this graphic, but I thought it was amusing. So it kind of talks about what are the different social media sites? And we know that these are some of the major ones that are being used. There's been a lot of interest in political, social discussion about TikTok most recently and whether it should be banned. That is above my pay grade to answer that question. But what I will say is that teens are smart and they are very clever at using different things. So I will give an example from my own personal life. That my daughter's school, my 10-year-old daughter's school, found out that the students were using their Chromebooks and were using either the email or messaging service on their Chromebooks. And so they were able to shut that down because they didn't want students doing this at home on their own time, whatever. And it turns out that the students then were using a PowerPoint on a shared drive, and they had a slide open, and they were chatting with each other by making a slide, putting their comment. Once then their friend had read it, they would note it, delete it, and then they would write their response back, right? So we can legislate or regulate whatever else, but kids are clever and they're gonna find a way around these things. So it is good to know what different apps do and what the different purpose is, but the broader principles are even more important. Okay. So again, here's kind of what we know. When we ask teens specifically how often they're using each platform, it's really changed over time. But one of the things I even realized the other day, I asked a patient I was working with what their favorite TV show was. And they looked at me and it was one of those you're old Dr. Jeff looks. They said, I just watch YouTube. What do you mean, what's my favorite TV show? as if flipping on TV and going to a certain channel was no longer even in the equation, right? And so I think this is just important to know, again, that these apps are changing over time. What kids and teens are using changes over time. And if I did this presentation 5 years from now, I guarantee you this would change even more. There will be new apps on there. The use of different types of apps will change, so it is a bit of a moving target. But again, if you look, and this is kind of that same graphic, but this one shows nearly 20% of teens say they're using these social media apps almost constantly, which means upwards of 6 to 8, even 10 to 12 hours a day. The teens are reporting use of specific social media sites, not just overall phone or screen or TikTok. It's I am using this one app 8 to 10 hours a day. So think about this, right? You're at school for 8 hours a day. You're hopefully sleeping for 8 hours minimum at night. That means literally every other waking moment would be spent on social media. And that's really problematic, and that's really worrisome. When we ask these teens similarly, how hard would it be to give up social media? First, they respond, almost a third of them respond, they know they're using it too much. They actually admit that they're using social media, using their phones too much, and that they want to change. They wish they could change. But they say it would be very hard or somewhat hard to do. Almost half of teens surveyed report, I know I need to change my use, and I can't do it. It would be too difficult. And when we kind of ask further about this, like why can't you or why wouldn't you? It's I'm addicted to it. I just can't stop. But the biggest answer is the fear of missing out. If I stop using TikTok, all of my friends will be talking about it and I won't know what they're talking about. If I'm left out of the group chat, if I'm not responding, then suddenly I won't know where things are going, what things are going on, I won't know where to go, I won't know what people are talking about. And that deep fear in adolescence especially, but we can all identify with this as people, is that if I am not on social media, then I cease to exist amongst my friends, amongst my peers. So if when you're asking your teen, turn off your phone, get off of TikTok, it's important to think about what you're asking them in their mind. You almost have to pretend it's a foreign language and you're translating it for a teen, and you're saying, disconnect from your friends. Get away from your social circle. And that's a scarier question to ask. And so we'll talk about again why then doing this in a community way is so important. The question then we get again fairly often is kind of how much is too much? How much social media use, phone use, screen time should my child have? And that's a tough question to answer because I can't give you an amount of minutes or hours because again, it's really so context dependent. And what I encourage parents to think about instead is what social media is contributing to and what it's taking away from. So what we know from research is that social media can lead to inappropriate sharing of information. This can be sharing information about your family, putting on social media that you're going to be out of the house or on a trip, sharing information about their parents or siblings, sharing photos or inappropriate material or content. So one of the biggest risks is just inappropriate disclosure of information. We also know it can be associated with mental health challenges. There was a study done at a university that showed when a randomly kind of sampled group of students was asked to decrease entirely their social media use for a couple of weeks, and then they reported on their mental health. And within just a few weeks, just by reducing their social media use, their anxiety improved and their depression decreased. It was nearly immediate, just a couple weeks, we saw that effect on their mental health. We also know that social media, particularly for young women, can contribute to body image concerns, but we're actually seeing this with both men and women as teenagers because of the unrealistic ideal of airbrush and photoshopped images that are shown. And the significant increase in body image concerns that we're seeing in kind of a mental health setting has a direct relationship with the increased use of social media. We also know that social media can contribute to cyberbullying. Again, kids are often engaging in a lot of discussion and sharing and conversations and gossip and bullying. And it's all being done in a very dangerous format because it's not being observed by teachers, by parents. It's also often anonymous. And there's kind of this paradox where it can feel like it's temporary, right? Snapchat, I just sent something and then it disappears. What we actually know is it's far more permanent. I had a patient that sent an inappropriate message. He sent a message to somebody that he knew he should not have sent. And they screenshotted it and shared it with their friend group. And that image will never disappear. And that was a really hard moment to discuss with him, right? And he felt terrible. He knew that he should not have sent the message. And the idea that it was permanent was really hard. If you say something stupid, and I do that on basically a daily basis, right? At least there's a chance that we kind of move on from that. But you put something out there on social media and it stays there forever. But when we look at the research, what's even more damaging, what's maybe even more problematic than these negative impacts of social media and phone use and technology use are what they're taking away from. It's less even about the fact that they're using TikTok constantly, they're using YouTube, watching YouTube constantly. It's what they're not doing. This is what's really problematic. The first is sleep. We're seeing an almost 2-hour decrease in how much sleep kids are getting at night. I talk to a broad range of kids at Children's, so it's a pretty representative sample from all across the broader Milwaukee area. And most, I would say, a large proportion, a big percentage of the patients I talk to, when I ask them what time to go to bed, they just kind of laugh at me. And 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 4 a.m., right? And when I ask parents the same question, they might say they're going to bed at 9 or 10 or something reasonable. But it turns out that phone gets plugged in and then it gets dragged right over to the bed, right? And so social media technology, it's causing a huge negative impact on sleep. We also know it's causing a significant decline in physical activity. And this isn't just physical activity in terms of playing a sport or going out and exercising specifically. It's even just the day-to-day little bits of activity that are actually really important for kids, right? Walking a couple of blocks to a friend's house. That's important. That is actually a meaningful level of physical activity for a kid. And so if you're engaging in all of this interaction and discourse online and you're not actually going out and even just doing those little things, that's, again, really a difficult situation. We also know it's interfering with homework. We were just talking about this and how connected now homework, reading, math, all of these school-based assignments are to technology, right? They're on a Chromebook or a tablet, and so much of this is great in many ways. I'm not speaking about it in a blanket bad way, but it often means that screen use so much more easily now trickles into phone use, social media use, right? If you're staring at a screen to do your math assignment and a little chat bubble pops up or something else kind of, email dings, you know how easy it is to get distracted and get pulled away from what you want to be doing. But if you read The Anxious Generation, what the author really highlights is perhaps most, again, missing from social media use is what we call social learning. Kids and teens learn by watching what people in the world around them do. They watch people make bad choices and face negative consequences. They watch people make good choices and have positive reactions. They watch their parents, they watch their friends, they see things happen in the world around them. And we learn a lot from that, and that's a really good thing because it means we don't necessarily have to make all of those mistakes ourselves. When we lock in on a screen and we stare at a phone and we stare at Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, we lose that chance to observe and learn from the world around us. And that is tremendously damaging. Just think about how much your kids in the classroom learn simply by watching their peers and seeing what another student is doing at the board or another student is doing on their homework, right? And so you take away that opportunity, and now you're just existing by yourself in a vacuum. And you can feel totally directionless, and it removes that entire opportunity to learn from others. All that said, so some of the harms of social media, some of the things it's taking away from, we know there's some positives. We know that it can increase connection with friends. We know that for some kids, if it's really cold outside, if they have a chronic illness, if there's a pandemic going on, we know there is some benefit to being able to stay connected with other people. I also know sometimes it can just alleviate boredom, right? I guess I will admit, doctor's office waiting room, sometimes long car drive, like there are times where I am very happy that my kids have a tablet or kids have something to do, and that can happen on occasion. Perhaps most importantly, social media can help find and engage support systems. And we know for that minoritized communities, for kids who are feeling left out or not accepted, or who need to find a peer group that they can connect with and identify with, social media can be very helpful. There can be some benefits in certain circumstances and in certain situations. But we just talked about all of these other things that weigh down the other side of the scale. And so really what our job is as mental health providers, as teachers, as parents, is to figure out how to find a balance here and how to potentially even emphasize the good things about technology and the good things about social media and try to limit some of these really negative impacts that we're seeing. The last thing I want to get to before I kind of talk about the how is the age piece, because this is another question we get a lot. When should my child have a phone? When should they be allowed on TikTok or Instagram? And when I think about age, we have the most arbitrary view of this stuff, right? We decide that at like 16, yeah, why not? You can drive a car, you can go 70 miles per hour down the freeway. Seems like a safe bet. 18, you can vote, you can make really important decisions. You could argue maybe that should be lower, right? And then, okay, alcohol, 21, maybe, different substances, different ages. So we have just these arbitrary age guidelines for different things that we allow in our society. And I encourage parents to think less about age, and again, a specific number for their child, and more about development. Because every kid is really different. And when I talk about development, I mean these kind of ideas, like decision making. How able is your child to make decisions that are in their best interest, that are safe, that are going to protect themselves? And that might be different for different kids within the same family, much less different kids in different families. It's also important to think about impulsivity. Who here has ever sent off a text or an email or something like that they regretted about 5 seconds later? Okay, glad I'm not the only one. We can all be impulsive at times, but the frontal lobe, the part of our brain that controls impulse control, that helps us stop before we do something we shouldn't do, doesn't fully develop until 25 in males, 20 in females. We're a little behind the ball on that one. But the big challenge with this is that, again, social media can be permanent. And so the thing you do impulsively can last a long time or forever. So think about individually for your child, are they impulsive? Do they think through things first, or do they make very quick impulsive decisions? Their insight. One of the things that I think we don't talk about enough as sort of a trait of people, something that is really beneficial, is kind of how much insight they have into their own use, right? Do they recognize when something is problematic? Do they pick up on their own challenges? Do they know when they're having a hard time? And most importantly, their surroundings. There's a reason that when we talk about driving a car, there's different laws for when they have their peers with them versus when they're with a parent or when they're alone, right? We know that a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old at home with their parent might make a really good decision, And that same teenager with a group of friends in a basement somewhere might make a really bad decision. And so think about not just their age, but what are their surroundings? What is the context that you're thinking about using social media technology in? And think about that helping guide kind of when and where and when is appropriate. The underlying thing that I would encourage in this sense is too late is better than too early. And this can be hard. Again, it can be hard to tell your child that you're the last person amongst your group of friends to have a phone, or to be allowed on this app, or to be able to use this website. But isn't that a better decision to make than the one who gets it too early and makes a rash, harmful decision before they even are able to understand what the consequences of that might be? So all of this can seem scary and it can seem overwhelming when we look at the data and we think about the potential harms. So let's talk a little bit about what you can do. The first step is self-assessment. Think about your own social media use, your own technology use, and what example that sets for the people around you. And that goes both for when you're using screens, social media, your phone. It also goes to the why. Why are you using it? What purpose are you using it for? And just monitoring and thinking about your own use is a very good first step, because again, back to that social learning idea, even if they would never admit it, your child and your teen is watching you. They are observing your behavior as a guide for what they should or shouldn't do. Second thing is to just ask questions and to be curious. Teens get a reputation, especially, as being really closed off and being really guarded. And they can be snappy, right? That natural curiosity, hey, I'm just asking questions, can be met with a door slam or an eye roll at best, maybe. But if you don't ask the questions, you're never going to get the answers. And what's important about being curious, why I included that and not just ask questions, is it's really hard as a parent to truly just be open and curious. We're really good at asking judgmental questions, right? Loaded questions. What are you doing on your phone?
Yeah.
Right? And that isn't curious. That's accusatory. Why are you still up? Right? If you come from curious, if you approach it as a problem to solve together, or as not a problem at all, but something you just truly want to know more about, I cannot guarantee you will get all the answers, but it will move you in a closer direction. Lastly, do your own research. Don't take their word for it. I think the biggest challenge again is feeling like you know this stuff, and then it shifts and it moves. So who can?
I know Mr. Beast.
Okay, Mr. Beast. Do we know the other one? Karst. Okay. All right. So if you've heard of either of these are content creators or influencers or personalities. They apparently make billions, which really makes me question psychology as a career path. But these two young men have more influence over teens and youth than we could ever begin to imagine. Karst live streams whole days at a time of just like what he's doing and hanging out with friends and talking to people, right? And he's apparently very entertaining. But if your child is watching him, if your teen is watching him, again, I'm not going to say that's a bad thing, but it is beholden to you, just like you would have investigated that soft drink, to know what he's talking about, to know what content he's sharing, to know what your teen is observing, so that you know more about how to talk to them about it. Next, after you get more information, it's important to manage the safety piece. Again, start with your experiences. If you've ever gotten a phishing scam or a text that wasn't quite, didn't appear to be true, or you've ever even fallen for something like that, you've ever gotten kind of a malicious email, or you clicked on a link you accidentally, you shouldn't have, talk to your teen about that. Being humble as a parent, letting them know that you can make these mistakes too, can really actually open up conversation. Because teens never want to feel stupid. They never want to feel like they're being lectured, right? They want to feel like you understand them. You can share with them that these mistakes happen for you too. Research and use parental controls and privacy settings. And don't do this behind the scene. Talk to them about it. If you're setting the privacy settings or you're using these different controls and they exist and they're worth looking into, be open about what guidelines and what restrictions you're placing so that they know and it's up front and it's right there. Talk to your kids, your teens, about the nevers. Some of the things that you might think are self-explanatory might not be. So taking inappropriate pictures, sharing inappropriate content, meeting a stranger that they've met online, right? Some of these things that you'd be like, oh my gosh, like, don't give my kid a ton of credit, but they wouldn't do that. They might, right? And I don't mean to be insulting with that. Kids can be brilliant, straight A students, all-star athletes, really well behaved, really kind, good people, and then they go into their room and they can make one really bad decision. So talk about the nevers, talk very openly about the things they cannot do. And then listen. This gets back to the idea of being judgment-free and truly being curious. Try to understand what they're using, how they're using it, why they're using it. And try to figure out what those needs are. What needs are being met by their use? Because if you tell somebody to stop doing something, you better have a replacement for it. You need to know what they are using their phone for, what they're using TikTok for, so you can help find a replacement that matches those same needs without the same risks. I use the term boundaries over rules then when I talk to parents about setting up ideas within their home. And the best example I can give in kind of as a metaphor for this, or as something that I just believe in and think is really helpful, is the idea of a curfew. And again, every parent is different, every situation is different. But when I was growing up, my parents did many things, some right, some wrong, but one thing that they always said that I appreciated was be home at a reasonable time. And I was like, reasonable time? That was kind of vague and unhelpful. Can you at least just say like 12 o'clock, 10 o'clock? Like give me a time you want me to be home by. And their whole reasoning for this, that made more sense after I got older, was we want you to think about what that means. Do you have practice the next morning? Do you have a test the next day? How much sleep do you need to get? Do you have to go to work? So by setting this example of a reasonable time instead of a curfew that was 10 o'clock, they made me think about what a good time meant. And again, I actually think that really applies as we talk about boundaries for social media. This idea of not just setting strict rules, but when should you use your phone? When are good times? When are inappropriate times? Where? Right? If you're with your friends, if you're at home, when, where, who? Who are you talking to? Who are you around? Who are the people you're interacting with? And understanding truly what that might be. Knowing that the name, the face on a screen may not actually be the person you think it is, right? Figuring out why. Again, back to this idea of knowing why teens are using social media and helping understand their purpose. And then how much. And thinking about this not just as a set number of hours per day, but really thinking about what are the things they aren't doing instead. So some practical tips to help monitor. First, a shared charging space. Strongly encourage tablets, phones, Chromebooks, everything else be charged outside of the room, and that they are all in the same area. And that there is a time when devices are to be charged, and then they are there for the rest of the night. I think that can help for sleep, and it can also help you as a parent from a monitoring standpoint. You can also set a password that you have to put in on your child's device in order to download an app. Again, it is not enough to just delete TikTok or to delete Instagram. Make sure you know what they are adding, and make sure you have a password that they do not know in order to put any new apps or any new content on their devices. And finally, back to this idea that I keep kind of resorting to of open conversations. Just making sure that you're honest with them about your monitoring. A lot of parents will ask me directly, should I look at my teens' text conversations? Should I be friends with them on Facebook? Should I scroll through their Instagram? And I can't give you a yes or no to that. But if you do not do it behind their back. Tell them, I'm going to be looking at your Instagram. Can I have your phone, please? I need to scroll through your social media to make sure you're being safe, right? You can choose to do that. It's okay. I have no problem with parents doing that. But make sure that you're doing that in an open way, because that's going to facilitate communication rather than a lack of trust. Okay. This is all really hard. And again, I think that the biggest kind of strength you have going for you is a sense of community. And again, this goes back to the idea that it's more about shared values than just having the same rules. One parent might say that screens turn off at 8, the other might say 10. One parent might say 4 hours a day is enough, one might say 30 minutes a day is enough. It's more about sharing as parents, as a community, what your values are and what you're trying to emphasize. And as you talk about this topic after today, thinking about that in the conversations you have with your friends, with your school community, what are the values we're trying to emphasize around technology and social media use? Community connections, and not just for parents, but thinking about this for kids. When we think about what social media has really taken away from us as a society, it's this. We don't have communities anymore, at least not in the same way we used to. And our kids are truly being deprived of connecting with people in a community sense, right? Feeling this group of people around them in a physical space where they can talk and share and feel emotions and see emotions and all of these things that benefit us when we're with a group of people and we can connect with them. So help create that for your child and for your teen. It will take away some of their desire to constantly use social media, because that's what a lot of them are using it for. Exchange ideas and information. Talk about this in an open forum. If you find a good way to monitor or set restrictions on an app, or you find out that your child is using an app you've never heard of, share that with other parents. Talk to other people in your school community, in your neighborhood about that, because it's important to keep everybody updated and keep everybody kind of in the know about what's going on. And embrace that this is difficult. Know that as a community, you're in this together and that it is a big challenge, so it's only going to be tackled by everybody working together. All right. A website I highly recommend, and schools can actually enroll in this as an entire school community, is called Wait Until 8th. And this is a website that has a ton of great resources. and as well as a parent pledge to wait until after 8th grade to give their child a cell phone. That again is a little bit of an arbitrary grade, and different parents, different people might have different feelings about this. But the website itself allows you to at least form this sense of community and togetherness with making some simple rules. It includes my favorite resource, which is the family phone plan, which is an entire plan you can go over with your child or teen to talk about limits and restrictions and guidelines for use. So all of the things I just kind of mentioned today, it spells these out, and you can create this plan or contract together so that you're in agreement and kind of in connection with each other about this. And you can see this is the next kind of piece they have is a social media plan. If they have a social media platform, they want an account, you can go through it and you can talk about why you're using it, when you're using it, what a healthy amount of use is, and it's a great way to actually open these conversations. Okay. With all that, I greatly appreciate your time. So on the table in front of you, there are some table talk topics that we will go over. And I encourage you, I'll let April kind of introduce this and you can discuss these amongst yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. I'm trying to figure out this whole new technology era as well, and Blue Sky is one of the newest apps. My friends on Facebook are saying, I'm leaving Facebook, you gotta follow me on Blue Sky. I don't know what Blue Sky is. But we're gonna do a table talk, 15-minute session, and we have another light refreshment coming out for you. Mo and Courtney are gonna serve you some mac and cheese and cornbread from Maxie's. You can either have it now or save it for your dinner later, but we wanted to give you a little comfort food to go along with the table talk session. If you want to move to a table so you have more people to talk to or fill up a table, please do that as well. But inside the red container are some questions. You can choose a lead for your table to read the questions and go through the answers. Some of them have research-based responses on the actual question card. And, from the discussion, that might spark some other questions that you want to ask of Dr. Karst. So after about 15 minutes, we'll go back to a Q&A with Dr. Karst, and then we will finish up our evening. So, thanks. Yeah, you're welcome.